Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am going to be joined by Guy Courtin, and he is the VP of Industry and Advanced Technology at Tecsys. He's also all over the place on LinkedIn, at ProMat, Modex, doing automation tours and all kinds of great stuff. So we've been trying to connect for a little bit to make this happen. We're finally doing it here, so I'm excited to have Guy on the show today and talk to us a little bit about Tecsys, but also talk to us a little bit about warehouse automation in general and kind of his perspective from that side and what he's seeing being so involved in everything as well. So, Guy, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing great, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me here. And like you said, we've been waiting to do this. So I'm really excited about finally getting on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this.
Definitely. It's great to get you on, and definitely great to get your knowledge and perspective from the industry on here as well. But you work for Tecsys. So tell us a little bit about Tecsys and what it is that you guys do.
Absolutely. So, interestingly enough, this is our 40th anniversary at Tecsys.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Tecsys is a supply chain software provider. We started out as an ERP provider, but then we've migrated. And I think what's relevant to this conversation is we have two warehouse management or two WMS solutions, one called Elite, one called Omni. One was our legacy Elite solution, which is really a heavyweight WMS. And then we acquired a company out of Copenhagen a few years ago. And with it came the Omni WMS, which is much more geared towards e-commerce, retail type focus for WMS. So really excited, but of course we have other solutions within the portfolio, order management, transportation management. But I think what's more important is the industries we focus on. So we really focus on three big industries: healthcare, B2B distribution, and then retail. And then within retail, think of it as footwear and apparel, soft goods. I always tell people the easy way to think about what we do in retail is we don't do grocery, but we do a lot of everything else.
Okay.
Because everybody always asks, well, do you do grocery? No, we don't do grocery.
Yeah.
But really exciting, from that perspective, I think we really tackle some of the hard supply chain problems that are out there, especially around the warehouse and distribution and fulfillment. And as I'm sure you know, and you see this a lot, right? It's not getting any easier.
Yeah.
Fulfillment is getting more and more challenging for multiple reasons. And that keeps me up at night, but it also is what keeps me going every day, because I think it's a lot of opportunities for folks like us to help our customers help their customers.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's really interesting because, like you said, it is getting more challenging and more complex in a sense, and we're bringing in tons of different solutions. You were at ProMat, and we just look around at the amount of technology that's come into the space. It's pretty astounding, and it can be certainly overwhelming, I think, too, for a lot of companies that are trying to figure out how do they tackle some of these complex challenges and get through that. And it's interesting to see. I think what stands out to me the most about Tecsys is that you guys seem to be so involved in everything that's happening in the space. I mentioned the kind of the automation tours in there and stuff. So, I mean, tell us, I guess, why is that kind of so important for Tecsys to be not just focused on their own product, but then also have these great relationships and bring kind of a light to these other companies and tell us a little bit about the automation tour in there as well, and how that kind of coincides with what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think it comes back down, and it sounds cliched, Kevin, but it's really about the customer. What I mean, the customer is not just our customer at Tecsys, but our customer's customer. And what we've seen really in the past few years, and since I've been at Tecsys, is our customers are coming to us saying, well, wait a minute, we have a warehouse, we have 5 warehouses, we have X amount of warehouses. We're fulfilling, whether we're replenishing a hospital network or we're selling, sneakers and shoes to customers, or we're moving cabinetry to Home Depot. But what we're finding, or what our customers are finding, is that they need to look at a lot of different solutions, if you will, and technologies and different use cases and workflows for fulfillment, for getting their product to their customers' hands. And what that's done is it's given us an opportunity to really help broaden their understanding of what the solutions that are out there that they can then leverage to satisfy their customers' needs, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the key. If they can't satisfy their customer needs, then they're not going to keep doing business. So part of that, and coincides, of course, with the explosion of what I would consider modern automation within the warehouse.
Right.
We've had conveyors and carousels and VLMs for years, decades now, right? And they still serve a very valuable purpose. But what I think has been very interesting in the past few years is sort of the explosion of, AMR, AGV technology, ASRS, right? All these what I consider modern material handling solutions within the warehouse. And we're seeing that not only has this explosion from the OEM side happened, but now the interest from our customer sides has exploded. And you couple this with, I think we all know this, labor issues. Yeah. So you all of a sudden have this, semi-perfect storm of drivers, and our customers are asking, and they're looking right there. The value of this, I think, too, Kevin, I think what's interesting is that these customers are looking to folks like us, right? Solution vendors. They're looking obviously to folks like you as pundits, and looking to the traditional folks and Gartners in the world and others. And they're saying, no one has sort of a monopoly on information and on good ideas. So we're going to look across the board of our network, and we're happy to step into that breach and to help them. And by no means do we think that we have all the answers, because we certainly don't. Right. But we have, history, we have experience, we have knowledge ourselves. And we certainly want to share that with our customers. So that's what spurred some of these efforts we've made. You mentioned the automation tour, which I think was something that we started last year in Atlanta at Modex, and we continue this year at ProMat in Chicago. And it was highly successful, and we will continue to do so. And what we discovered, or what we thought about, Kevin, was like, hey, we have a lot of customers asking us about modern automation. Yeah. And when they ask us, and no fault of theirs, a lot of times I get questions like, oh, I'm looking for automation. Well, what are you looking for? And they give me a list. Yeah. And I literally look at the list, Kevin, I say, I know what you did. You went to Google, you typed in warehouse automation, and the first 12 hits you got, you said, I'm going to look at these guys. And you're looking at like a right-hand robotics for picking. You're looking at a Locus robotic AMR. You're looking at an AutoStore ASRS, right? You're all over the place, which is understandable. Yeah. So we thought, hey, let's help our customers out by giving them at least a sliver, if you will, of what options are out there. And then leveraging our network, right, our partner network, the folks that we work with, to give our customers some insight into, okay, well, what is the difference between an ASRS and an AMR, right? A GTP versus something else, with a picking robot, a picking arm robot. And it gives them, and these automation tours have given them a chance to let us sort of guide them in this safari world of automation and give them, we hope, at least some guidance as to what we see that's out there. And I've always encouraged folks that have been on the tour, like, hey, go back and talk to these folks. Spend as much time as you want. Yeah. ask questions, go talk to other vendors that we haven't brought you in front, but at least you have an understanding, a very high level understanding of the different flavors of modern automation. And at least now we can start, whittling down what you're looking for a little bit more from the 10,000 foot level, now maybe the 5,000 foot level. And there's still a lot of work to do. But for us, that was really the opportunity and to be, I'm going to use a cliche, that trusted advisor to help our customers at least get a slight insight into what's out there and what's available.
Yeah, I think that's such a great thing. And I love your point about, they come to you with a list and it looks like basically they just Googled warehouse automation or something, right? I mean, I think that's such a great thing to point out because we look, even if you look online on, LinkedIn or on at the trade shows themselves, there's companies certainly that have like a huge presence and they spent tons of money on marketing and making sure they have that presence. But just because they're the biggest one, right, that you see all the time or they show up on, like you said, the top of the Google search results doesn't necessarily mean that's the fit for you, right? Or that's the one that you should be going after. So it's great that you're able to help to kind of boil that down a bit and have people get that understanding of where they need to be. And I think even in that sense too, like getting the idea of where should they even be looking at initially, like what part of the warehouse or what type of thing should it be an AMR, should it be an AGV, should they go right for an ASRS, something like that. It's, you need to have that understanding of not only what the differences are and what you can do with the differences, but also I think the undertaking on that side too as well. A company I worked for a couple of years ago, we had like no automation in place yet. We had maybe 30 feet of conveyor, and that was it, right? It was from the shipping to the UPS truck, and that was it. And this was before like there was even any real discussion on automated unloading of containers. And my boss was like, "I want to figure out how can we automate the unloading of the containers." And I'm like, we're like way far away from that. Right. And he's like, no, that's what I want to focus on. And I'm like, I don't even think Stretch from Boston Dynamics was like commercialized yet. So I'm like, I'm like, I don't even know where to go with this. So I think it's great to like have that understanding and be able to have a resource like you and other people out there to just kind of boil it down and really understand like, okay, like where am I looking? What am I looking at, and what's really realistic for where I am right now at this point in my my operational improvement journey and trying to understand like, okay, what can I take on? So I'm curious from that sense. I imagine people coming on the automation tour probably vary the levels of understanding of automation. So I'm curious, what did you hear recently from those ProMat tours? What are people really interested in? What are they confused about? What are they unsure about? What are they excited about? Tell us about kind of some of the feedback there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll maybe roll into it, Modex from last year as well. Sort of
sure, yeah.
Over a span of a year. The biggest feedback I get from this is the unknown. What I mean by that is, to your point, a lot of the folks that we had on the automation tour, and you're right, they're different levels of maturity, but I would say for the most part, they know robots or they've heard of it. They kind of have a sense of what it looks like and what the use cases are within the warehouse. But the unknown, what I mean by that is, they don't realize, and, I'm still learning this every day, that there's so many different automation solutions for specific use cases within your warehouse. Having said that, I think one thing that's been interesting too is there's sort of I don't want to say disappointment, because it's not disappointment, but there's sort of a learning. It's kind of this aha moment where they're like, oh, wait, we're not going full into fully automated lights out warehouses, right? Where there's no FTE in there. You've got, robots moving stuff back and forth. You've got robotic arms picking stuff and putting it away. You mentioned Stretch, right? You've got these robots offloading my trucks coming in and building a pallet. And all. No, we're not. Yes, we can do each piece of it, but there's no one doing all of it. Right? Or there's no warehouse trying to do all of it. So that's been one of the things that's been eye-opening for me in these tours is I think people at times have kind of come in with this conception that we're going from 0 to 100, right? We're going from your example you gave. We're going from having a couple of conveyors maybe to now, hey, fully lights out automation.
Yeah.
I have an FTE issue and great, I'm going to automate everything and I don't need anybody in my warehouse. And it's like, let's pump the brakes. That might never happen.
Yeah.
Right. I feel as if that's sort of this sort of, this discussion that some folks have, that's this dream, air quotes here. But I think the reality is far short of that. So what's been really interesting about the automation tours over the past year has been really this eye-opening of, okay, fully automated lights out warehouses, not going to happen anytime soon. But then the other eye-opening thing is, oh, wait a minute, I can start by just putting automation over here in the warehouse and getting a taste, right?
Right.
I can, I use this example all the time. Everybody's got a dunnage issue. I'm going to move dunnage. And I've talked to some customers, one of which in particular, I remember he was telling me they have 1.5 FTE. That's all they do is move dunnage. And the guy told me, he's like, when we get cuts, who gets cut first? That FTE.
Yeah.
But I still have to move the dunnage because I can't let it pile up at the end of my aisles.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden there's like, hey, there's a solution out there, right? There's automation vendors like one of our partners, Fetch, right, can do this, where they just have a robot. All it does is it moves dunnage. And it just picks up the dunnage and moves it to wherever you need it. You drop it off in the recycle bin and it comes back. And all of a sudden you see this, you show these use cases to someone on the automation tour. And all of a sudden you can see their eyes kind of light up, or they're like, oh, okay, so I can actually start putting in robots in my warehouse. I can start taking on functionality that might not necessarily be the core function of my warehouse. I'm not going to go right into picking or put away or even cycle counting using a robot.
Yeah.
But I can do a simple thing like removing dunnage. And now all of a sudden I can start getting my warehouse employees and my systems used to having a robotic system in there. And then you can see in their minds, they start realizing, oh, okay, then I can do this. And then in 6 months, 9 months, I can then start looking at put away or some other function in the warehouse and bring automation in. And I feel as if that's, to me, really encouraging, because what it's demonstrating is that there's a whole host of automation solutions for a whole host of use cases. So let's not just think about one or two. B, there's a way to, it's not a big bang, right? I'm not going to just change everything overnight. I'm going to ease my warehouse into the notion of having automation. And I think C, the great part is then you can see, the opportunity to start piecing together the use cases, prioritizing them, and you'll probably find an automation solution that can fit all those use cases. Yeah. And then it's the opportunity to figure out, all right, well, what's my roadmap, right? Do I want to automate X, Y, Z in my warehouse? Yes or no? Okay, here's why I'm going to do it. And by the way, here's 6 vendors that can help you do that. So now you have your choice,
right? Which
I think is exciting too, because, the last I've seen is there's over 600 automation OEMs out there. And now we know, some are can do multiple things, but there's no consolidation in the market yet, right? We're still in the Wild West. It's still a lot of, small to medium size automation providers out there, which for a warehouse, I think, yes, there's some risk because they might go out of business, but there's opportunity where you're like, hey, you can go out there and pick. You have, you're not stuck with, I'm going to go back to my old days, right? If you're buying an ERP solution, you're kind of stuck with 2 or 3 big ERP players. And you have maybe a couple small ones, but you don't have much choice. Here you have a plethora of choice. And I think that's the opportunity. And I from the tours, I think that's some of the things I've taken away. I think the other part that I've taken away from the tours, which has been interesting too, is that people are very interested in automation, no surprise. But again, shouldn't be a surprise. They're starting to be a little bit more hesitant with regards to pulling the trigger. Now, part of it is the paradox of choice. There's so much choice out there. They don't know the technology is changing so quickly. I think it's also, and one of the things that I've talked to a lot of folks on the automation tours and others when we talk about automation is, it's the whole notion of optimizing one part of your system, but not optimizing the whole. So if I optimize part X in your warehouse, great. Let's take picking, for example. I optimize your picking module. Your picking now, you've jumped up, your UPHs are through the roof. You're doing great. But all of a sudden, at takeaway, I don't have enough labor to bundle all that stuff up and put it in my FedEx truck. So now I have a bottleneck. Yeah. I talked to one customer who put in an optimized picking, and all of a sudden they realized I don't have enough totes. So at Induct, I'm running out of totes too quickly. Yeah. And then at takeaway, I have too many totes piling up. So now what do I do? Right. So I think we're starting to see that too. And I think people are starting to, which is good. I think they're starting to think about it more holistically, which I've noticed in my conversations during these tours. They still recognize that they should and need to think and have an automation strategy, which I think is also good. I think we're at a tipping point here where it's, when do we pull the trigger? When do people pull the trigger? What is the cadence, if you will, of looking at automation and putting automation in?
Right.
And I think that's the part that's going to be a challenge for all of folks who are trying to invest in automation, the automation vendors themselves, because we are, I believe, at a tipping point where, we know the interest is there.
Yeah.
We just don't know what pace at which people are going to start adopting that automation.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Step, step, step. Do you know how many steps your warehouse workers are taking a day? When your workers are walking, you're losing money. Endless trips to the printer or computer add up fast. Newcastle's mobile industrial carts with integrated power eliminate the walking to stationary printers and computers, keeping workers focused on high-value tasks, often doubling their output. Thousands of powered cart installations, including ones at the new warehouse's own micro-fulfillment center and in my previous jobs, prove that Newcastle customers get more done and save money. To learn more, head to newcastlesys.com. That's newcastlesys.com. Yeah, I think that's a really great point there at the end. I mean, it's interesting because, like you said, and we kind of mentioned a couple times already, I mean, there's so much choice out there, right? It's kind of, for somebody that is like just trying to figure out how to get into automation, it can be a little overwhelming because there's just so much to pick from. And like you said, like what's going to be right? Like what technology is still going to be here, 3, 4, 5 years from now, and how is it going to improve with me? But I love your approach there about, taking kind of a smaller, repetitive task that is something that needs to happen, but oftentimes the resources kind of get pulled away from there. Try and automate that and start to test that within your operation and your systems, as you mentioned. I mean, I think that's such a great way to go about it, because I think oftentimes too, in talking to people, I think the thinking, I mean, even in my example, right, it's like, how do we take this big task that is this huge thing about our operation, and how do we just automate that, right? And instead of like thinking about, what's the low hanging fruit here, easy to automate, repetitive, we do this all the time, right? And there's not much variability to it, and we can start to get something there and then see how do we expand upon that. So I think that's a great approach that you mentioned there. I'm curious in that sense too as well. I mean, how do you, for an operation, I mean, themselves, I think, a lot of the conversation we're having here is about like, where do I start, or how do I start? I mean, how do you kind of guide a company or your customers to help them to start to understand, like, what do they need to do or put in place to start that automation journey? I mean, from a system standpoint, operation process standpoint, I mean, what advice would you give there?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I think I don't think it's formulaic too much, Kevin, right? But I do think there's a lot of things in a formula you need to think about, and you mentioned a bunch of them, right? Let's start with your systems. You have to look at your systems. What's your WMS? Do you have a WCS layer? Et cetera. I think the one that sort of, when I talk to customers and prospects, the first thing I always say is, well, let's break down the use cases, right? What are the use cases that that you're trying to address within your warehouse. For example, I was actually just out at a prospect last week in California. Beautiful warehouse, greenfields, they're basically a 3PL. And the conversation we had around automation is, well, let's look at the warehouse. Where are some, like you said, low-hanging fruit? Where are some of the pain points that you are currently dealing with? And can automation be a solution to that? Because it's not always going to be a solution. And then what I talked to them about and what we started talking about sort of future workshopping is, let's whiteboard it, prioritize it, right? Mm-hmm. Let's list what are your, here are all your workflows, your use cases within your warehouse. Let's prioritize, let's do a basic analysis of saying, well, here's my bottleneck today. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Oh, I don't have enough FTE. Or, a traditional issue I've seen in warehouses, I've got labor pulling a massive cart back and forth between racks. Right. First hour, that's okay. Second hour gets a little tougher. By the end of the shift, man, that cart's heavy, right? My back hurts, my legs hurt. It's not really fun. Okay, great. Can we identify that use case? Is there a solution for it? So I think that's the big one for me is that, right? It's understanding the use cases within the warehouse, which ones are a priority. And then the third part, I think that I talk to customers and prospects about all the time is change management. And that has nothing to do with the robot, it has nothing to do with the software, with the systems, but it has to do everything about your people, right? Your employees. And what I mean by that is at the end of the day, while yes, there's a lot of not complaints, but issues about getting enough labor, maintaining the labor and all this. And we kind of, at times I feel like we look too much at labor as, oh, it's a number, right? It's $18 an hour labor. Yeah. It's how many shifts I get. But what I want people to think about is you're going to introduce a new technology into your warehouse. You're going to introduce a technology that's unlike software. Yeah. It's very visible. Right? Yeah. It is very visible. That robot, regardless if it's an ASRS or a goods to person or whatever robot, it's a Locust bot or a 6 River bot or whomever, it's a physical object doing some kind of work.
You can't miss it
in your warehouse. You can't miss it, right? What does that mean for your change management? What does that mean for your labor? What does that mean for the way your labor interacts amongst themselves with the robots? Change is going to happen. Now, some could say change is good. Some could say change is bad. I think at some point it's somewhere in the middle. But I'll give you an example. I when I worked at 6 River, we would try to sell a lot of automation in Europe. We'd go to some places like northern Spain, low cost of labor and everything. Other places in Europe, a lot of unions, and they're like, we're not taking these robots, right? The change management, you're asking too much change here. We're not touching them, right? And I think that's something that we sometimes overlook when it comes to this automation journey is, what is that going to do for your environment? What's that going to do? And sometimes I would argue it's very positive. Like one of the things I learned too is, as the older generation ages out of working in the warehouse and you get the newer generation, the millennials and all that, sometimes that change management is good because now they're coming in, they're working with cool, air quotes, technology, physical technology. They're working with robots, right? It sounds a lot better, more fun to work with a robot than with a push cart. So that change management actually is a positive. But I always stress, again, with the folks we talk to, is that you really have to think about this from that perspective. Yeah. Because you, again, are introducing a physical object and a new workflow into your environment. And what are the potential disruptions? And I don't mean to say you don't do it because of it, but you need to be aware of it, right? And I think the other parts, and I don't want to say they come easier, but the systems, I think it's fairly straightforward. We understand you need for the most part, a more modern software layer, right? Because you're having modern robots in there with modern software that you want to communicate. You want to get the most out of your investment. You want to focus on those use cases, right? You want to understand, identify which ones we're going to tackle first and which is going to be on the roadmap and which maybe we'll never touch. You want to think about things, you kind of touched upon it, but I think greenfield, brownfield, because obviously to me, that dictates a lot of what you could invest in. I mean, if I've been in some environments where, very brownfield warehousing and it's like, well, we're going to eliminate this whole chunk of automation because just the physical change you'd have to do in that warehouse to get that automation in doesn't make sense. But the big one for me, again, for me, Ken, when I talk to prospects, customers, whoever, is think about the change management, right? Identify that, and maybe you can't, but be aware of it.
Yeah. I think that's such a huge thing, and I'm happy you pointed that out, because I think oftentimes the conversation revolves around the other points we talked about, like the physical aspect, the software, all these things. But I mean, that change management is huge as well, and I think you had a lot of great points there. I mean, one is a positive in a sense, right? Getting a younger generation more interested in something, like you said, a little cooler, right? Something more interesting to work with. But then there is that older generation that's, been a forklift operator for the past 20 years, right? And now you're going to bring in an automated forklift or pallet mover of some sort. Like, what does that mean for me, right? And I have a perfect example of that. Previous operation I was in, we were testing a mirror robot to pull a cart around, and the first day we had it in for demo. This guy, he's been working for the company for a long time. He pulled up and he said, "What, are you bringing that thing in to take my job?" And it was kind of like, oh, okay, like how do I explain this to him, right? So, but it is like preparing for that, because I think we're so kind of deep and intimately involved in the industry that, like, we understand that, like, hey, the robots automation are coming in to help us do a lot of these stuff that's, the dull, dirty, dangerous, right? Repetitive kind of stuff that people don't really necessarily want to do. But people that are not so familiar with the automation, right, or haven't been in operations where it's being utilized and, are doing those daily on the floor tasks, I mean, they might not be as familiar or have that concept. They're probably still thinking in the sense of, like, robots are coming to take our jobs, right? And I think, addressing that and explaining, like you said, having that change management, like, what does this mean for me? What are the positives for me, right? As an employee on the floor, how is this going to improve my job? I think, you start to address those things up front, then it helps to ease that in. And I've certainly heard a lot of great cases as well where, employees have embraced the robots and, become friendly with them in a sense as well, naming them and things like that. So, I mean, there's certainly, that can be done. And I think it's great that you pointed that out and bring that up as a real important point to do as you start to look at this and start to kind of consider that, even though we're talking about robots and automation, we still need to consider that human factor as well in there, right? So it's a really great point. I'm happy you brought that up there. So I mean, it's definitely very interesting to hear from you and certainly get all this information about automation and what's happening in the space. I mean, it's great what you guys are doing and trying to bring this information to everybody. And give these tours. I think that's such a great idea. When I saw you first started like posting about that, I was like, oh man, that's such a good idea. Like it makes so much sense. And so I'm curious, from your perspective and everything that you're kind of seeing and have been getting from the shows you attend and people you talk to. I mean, where do you think within the next year, 2 years? I mean, where are we really kind of heading with warehouse automation?
Oh yeah, I think
big question.
Big question, yeah. Don't hold me to it. 2 years from now we do this again. Let's not go. Well, maybe we should go back if I have the right answers, Kevin. If not, we can get it. But the big one I always tell people too, and I think we touched upon it, is automation's here, right? It's not the future; it's the today. Having said that, right, it's not. Let's all just jump into the deep end. So I think in the next couple of years, what we're going to see is a continued adoption, of course, of different types of automation. I'm not sure yet if we're going to see consolidation in the market. I think we're going to start seeing a little bit of it creep in, but I think it's still there's still too much of an expanding pie, so to speak, where we're going to see the big players sort of gobble up the little players and become big sort of monolithic players in different sectors. I do think what we're going to start seeing though, and I started seeing this a little bit in Chicago, and I think it's an interesting thought, is more and more thinking around interoperability of automation. So, we talked about the different islands of automation, and I think that's still going to be the case. So I'm going to have a robot that does picking and a box maker over here, and then, maybe I'm going to have a stretch over there offloading my truck, and then I'm going to have a Vecna moving, my stuff around with an automated, fork truck.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to start seeing more of is customers asking for, all right, this is great. Have it all play together, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to make this investment, if I'm going to start putting automation into my warehouse, and I'm going to start focusing on specific use cases, I'm going to have to start understanding the interoperability between the different automation, right? I kind of, I'm a software guy, so I go back to the old days of supply chain when I started in ERP, where, you look at it, and that was sort of the SAP Oracle play. It's like, well, I've got all the solutions you have for supply chain because it's all interoperable on my platform, and maybe all the individual solutions aren't great, but together they're good. So I think we're going to start seeing that questioning, and I don't know if it's going to create an opportunity for some of the bigger players to, yes, go out and to acquire more pieces of the automation puzzle so that they can be a one-stop shop.
Interesting.
Or is it going to be more on the shoulders of software solution providers like us and others to say, no, we'll provide the platform and you can plug in different automation and we'll be sort of the platform to allow everything to work together. I think that's what I'm going to keep an eye on for the next couple of years, because I think it is going to unlock a lot of opportunity for whoever can sort of solve that equation. Because if you think about it, and I think this is the way I look at it, just take one warehouse, right?
Yeah.
I've got basic functionality of receiving, put away, picking, cycle counting and all this, but I've got automation players that can do each part of it. I need someone that can come in there and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Warehouse Operator, I'll be the one pane of glass to run all this.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge of this, of course, is that each one of the solution providers, each one of the automation providers are going to say, well, why am I giving up control of my little piece to someone else? Because that's where I make my money. So I think that's where we're going to see a challenge and an opportunity for someone to step, or I don't want to say someone, but for companies to address that. Because I do think it makes sense, right? If you're a warehouse operator and great, I want to be able to have better picking, but I also need to have my conveyor that does put away, work better or whatever that may be. So I think if I look, my crystal ball for the next year or two or beyond, the big challenge for this industry is going to be the interoperability of all this automation tied back into, the software that folks like us provide.
Yeah.
I would even see, and maybe this is, too much pie in the sky, but can we start having interoperability also outside the warehouse? What I mean by that is, especially if we look at, some of the areas with regards to last mile fulfillment, things of that nature, as we're getting more automation in there. I was just looking, I don't know if, the company called Zipline, who does drone delivery.
Okay.
Right. Really fascinating company. But you look at what they're doing now here in the US in terms of delivering pharmaceuticals. I could see an opportunity where someone's going to tie in, all right, I have my warehouse, I'm doing my picking, right, using robots that then go to the takeaway, that then go brought to a Zipline drone delivery, and that goes off. Well, I need to be able to coordinate all that, right? Can I maximize that efficiency? So I think that, because one of the things I've seen too is like, hey, I bring robots in the warehouse, I do a tremendous job of picking, and all of a sudden it sits on the dock because I haven't coordinated with UPS or FedEx or whomever else who's going to come pick it up. So everything I've gained in the picking and the speed, I've just lost because I can't get it out on the road fast enough.
Yeah.
So, and as we see more automation and drones and driverless vehicles and all this, I think on that side of the equation, is there an opportunity to have, interoperability amongst that, right? Let's break out of just the warehouse, and can we do it and expand it almost to the end customer? Now that might be more down the road, more pie in the sky, but I do think, there's got to be some smart folks out there who are looking at this and trying to think about how can we create this network, this system of interoperability to allow us to truly maximize where we bring automation into the fulfillment side of the house, so that we might gain efficiencies in one area, but we lose it because we're not optimizing everywhere. And I know the idea of optimizing everywhere is sort of also, a dream, but can we start moving towards more of it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know that interoperability has been kind of a conversation in the past couple of years. And I know you mentioned Vecta in there. I know Daniel from there has been a big proponent of having interoperability, especially through mass robotics and things like that, and trying to make that happen. And I think it was interesting to see at ProMat recently. I mean, we did see like where, some booths had more than one solution provider showing like, oh, like this is how we can work with another company as well. So I think it's certainly something that it seems like the market is pushing towards, I would say. But I think, like you said, I mean, there is always that kind of underlying business question as well, right? Do I want to work with other people, or do I want to just develop my own solution for that part of the warehouse and try and just cover everything, right?
Yeah.
Which, kind of going back to your ERP days as well, right? As you mentioned, I mean, you have that kind of like, oh, I could go complete suite, but maybe one component is not the best for this thing, right? Or do I want to go like best of breed, right? So I think it would be interesting to see as well. And I think, we look at things like SVT. I know you guys do a lot of stuff with SVT as well, like, kind of helping that communication happening and easy deployment as well. So it will be really interesting to see that. And I think that, we talk so much here about, what a company should be considering as they're bringing in automation and looking at automation. I think that's one important point too, is like, if I bring in one solution, can I tie it up with other solutions? Can they communicate with each other? Am I going to limit myself in other processes? So really great point there, and points throughout this whole conversation. It's great to get your insights, especially as you're so active out there in the automation world and software world in our space. So really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Guy, and finally being able to make this happen, have this conversation. It was long overdue, I think. Definitely happy to be here. So thanks for coming on. And if people are interested in learning more about Tecsys, how can they do that?
Yeah. So first, thanks so much, Kevin, for having me on. This has been, as always, a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll do some more of these.
Yeah.
But yeah, to reach out, by all means, please look up our website. It's www.tecsys, that's TECSYS.com. A lot of information there. And of course, find me on LinkedIn, just GUICOURTIN, LinkedIn, or on Twitter. Unfortunately, my Twitter right now is a lot of complaints about the Boston Bruins, but we do talk about supply chain logistics on there as well.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So, Guy, thank you once again for joining me on the podcast today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.